£18 million from t-shirts, caps, and bottle openers. More margin than the beer itself. Britain's biggest breweries spent decades mastering how to sell lager. One man in a wax jacket worked out how to sell a personality, and that personality is worth more than the product. But here is what makes that figure genuinely remarkable. It sits on a foundation the entire industry was told could never exist, and on an origin story that is, at least partly, invented. Everyone knows how the tale goes. Clarkson harvests barley in 2020. He cannot shift it. He dumps it in a barn. Out of sheer necessity, he decides to brew beer. The accidental television presenter blunders into the drinks business. It is a perfect story. Straightforward, sympathetic, easy to root for. A man drowning in grain with nowhere to turn finds an unlikely way out. The British public has always had a soft spot for underdogs, and this hits every note. It is also largely constructed. But before we get to the deception, and it is a deliberate, calculated deception, we need to understand why it worked so completely. Because the story did not just fool casual viewers, it fooled journalists, it fooled industry analysts, it fooled the procurement teams at major supermarket chains who thought they were doing a feel-good deal with a bumbling television personality. Every single one of them missed the same thing. The story was too good. And when a story is too good in business, that is usually because someone very smart built it to be exactly that good. The trademark for Hawkstone Brewery was registered in October 2019, 6 months before the first barley crop went into the ground. Planning applications for a brewery on land next to Diddley Squat were submitted in early 2020, before Clarkson's farm had been commissioned by Amazon, before the cameras appeared, before any of this existed publicly. What genuinely happened is this. Clarkson purchased that farm in 2008. He spent 12 years quietly studying how British brewing actually worked. By the time that first harvest came in, he already had brewery architects engaged, master brewers on contract, and a business plan detailed enough to make a venture capitalist nervous. The bumbling farmer act is performance. Behind the lens, this is precision. And the precision extends further than most people realize. Clarkson did not just study the brewing industry. He studied what had gone wrong with every celebrity drinks brand that came before his. He watched what happened when famous names slapped their face on a bottle and handed the operation to someone else. He watched those brands plateau. He watched them get acquired, diluted, and quietly retired. He made a list of every mistake those founders made, and then built Hawkstone to avoid each one deliberately. That is not the behavior of a farmer who stumbled into beer. That is the behavior of someone who spent a decade preparing to enter an industry and chose the perfect moment to do it. Here is what the major breweries missed entirely, and it is exactly why they are now scrambling. AB InBev, the parent company behind Stella and Budweiser, runs on a model refined over generations. Centralized mega breweries. Ingredients pulled from wherever is cheapest worldwide. Distribution through tied house networks. Marketing spend running into hundreds of millions. That model functions because of volume. The more you produce, the lower the cost per unit. Clarkson examined that playbook and constructed the complete inverse. Hyperlocal sourcing, visible supply chains, zero conventional advertising, premium price points, small batch production. Everything business schools insist cannot go up against industrial scale. Except it is winning. Hawkstone is now stocked in over 4,000 pubs across Britain. It sits on shelves in Tesco, Sainsbury's, Waitrose, and Morrison's. The brewery has expanded 3 times in 4 years. And it is doing all of this while carrying operating costs running 30% higher per liter than mass-market lager. The premium pricing is not masking inefficiency. It is funding an entirely different kind of business, and customers are actively choosing it because it operates differently. What is easy to overlook in all of this is the timing. Clarkson launched Hawkstone right as the pandemic had fundamentally altered how British people thought about where their food and drink came from. Supply chain chaos had made people suddenly aware that their pint of lager was assembled from ingredients sourced across 4 continents. There was a genuine, widespread shift in consumer sentiment toward local, traceable, and transparent products. Clarkson did not create that shift, but he had built a product perfectly positioned to capitalize on it, and the timing looked like luck from the outside while being anything but. The distribution battle that followed was remarkable, and almost entirely unreported while it was unfolding. In early 2022, Hawkstone began approaching independent pubs directly. The large breweries manage pub distribution through exclusive supply arrangements. Tied houses carry what they are instructed to carry. Clarkson put something on the table the big players could not match: stronger margins, direct delivery, and a product that would pull customers through the door, specifically wanting to try it. Within 6 months, over 500 pubs had signed agreements. The major breweries responded by leaning on their tied houses to block Hawkstone. They applied pressure to wholesale distributors. They pulled every lever available. None of it stuck, because Clarkson had already located the crack in their model. Tied houses are shrinking, independent pubs are expanding, and the venues stocking Hawkstone were recording sales increases of 15 to 20% across the board. Food, other drinks, everything climbed, because Hawkstone was bringing in drinkers who had seen the show and come specifically to try the beer. There is a detail here that gets missed when people just look at the headline numbers. Those pub landlords were not stocking Hawkstone as a favor to a television personality. They were stocking it because it was solving a real problem they had. Independent pubs have been bleeding customers to supermarkets for 20 years. The fundamental question every independent landlord faces is, why would someone come here instead of buying a six-pack and sitting at home? Hawkstone gave them an answer. People were traveling specifically to pubs that stocked it, not nearby pubs. Pubs they had searched for because the show had mentioned them or because someone had posted about them online. The beer was functioning as a destination product. The major breweries had no framework for even understanding what that meant, let alone competing with it. Now, the figure's buried in the most recent Companies House filings because what those documents contain is striking. Hawkstone Brewery Limited posted revenues of £21.3 million in the last financial year. That part is widely known. Here is what most people walked past. That covers the brewing operation only. A separate entity exists called Hawkstone Trading Limited. Merchandise, licensing, brand partnerships. That company generated £18 million in revenue last year. £18 million from caps, glasses, clothing, and licensing arrangements. The merchandise operation runs at higher profit margins than the beer itself. Clarkson has constructed a lifestyle brand where the lager is almost incidental to the identity customers are actually purchasing. The farm produces barley. The brewery converts it into beer. The farm shop moves both. The television show promotes all of it. The merchandise transforms buyers into mobile advertising. The big breweries have marketing departments. Clarkson has an ecosystem, and that ecosystem has a compounding quality that no marketing budget can replicate. Every person wearing a Hawkstone cap is a conversation starter. Every person who has visited the farm shop has a story to tell about it. Every episode of Clarkson's Farm that gets watched, and the show continues to pull enormous viewing figures globally, is effectively a free advertisement that also happens to be genuinely entertaining content people seek out voluntarily. Compare that to the £200 million AB InBev spent on advertising last year. They paid for eyeballs. Clarkson has people actively choosing to watch his content and then going out to find the product afterward. The conversion rate on that kind of engagement is not even comparable to traditional advertising. There is no metric in a conventional marketing department that captures it properly. Celebrity alcohol brands typically follow a well-worn script. Famous name licenses to an existing drinks company. That company handles everything. Celebrity appears for photography and collects a percentage. Ryan Reynolds with Aviation Gin. George Clooney with Casamigos Tequila. Clarkson ran in the opposite direction. He physically built a brewery. He actually sources the ingredients. He genuinely employs brewers, logistics staff, and delivery drivers. Hawkstone is not a licensed arrangement. It is a vertically integrated manufacturing and distribution business that happens to have a famous owner. This distinction is critical, because the major drinks companies cannot acquire him the way they acquired Reynolds and Clooney. Those were licensing structures. Buy the rights, absorb the brand into existing distribution, extract the margin. Hawkstone is a physical operation with real infrastructure, real supply chains, and real employment contracts. Purchasing it would mean taking on an operating model that integrates with nothing the large breweries currently run. Carlsberg's £50 million approach carried a concealed question. Could they buy the brand, dismantle the local sourcing model, and retain the Clarkson name? Strip out the Oxfordshire barley, remove the Cotswold farming relationships, and Hawkstone becomes just another commodity lager. Clarkson saw that coming. Carlsberg discovered it the hard way. The operating model is the brand. You cannot detach one from the other. What Carlsberg's team fundamentally failed to grasp is that the Hawkstone customer is not buying lager. They are buying a set of values: locality, transparency, a connection to the land it came from. The moment you centralize the ingredients, you do not just change the production model, you break the promise the brand is built on. And once you break that promise, with the kind of engaged, vocal customer base Hawkstone has built, you do not get a second chance. Social media would have torn the acquisition apart within days. The brand equity would have evaporated before Carlsberg had finished unpacking the furniture. Clarkson knew that. He structured the business specifically so that any acquirer would face that problem. And now Clarkson has submitted planning documents for a substantial brewery expansion near Chipping Norton. The new facility would triple current output, but rather than consolidating into one centralized mega brewery, the plan is to franchise the model. Regional Hawkstone breweries spread across Britain, each sourcing barley from farms within a 50-mile radius, each employing local workers, each operating on the same principles as the Cotswolds site. Distributed production, unified identity. Industry analysts are calling it unworkable. Clarkson is building it regardless. The franchise model is clever in a way that is easy to underestimate. It does not just solve the production problem. It creates a network of local stakeholders who have a direct financial interest in the brand succeeding. Every regional farmer supplying barley to a Hawkstone franchise is now an advocate. Every local employee is part of the story. Every town that gets a Hawkstone brewery gets a piece of local pride attached to a national brand. You are not just expanding a drinks business. You are building a political constituency for a particular way of making beer. And that constituency has real weight in planning decisions, in local press coverage, in word-of-mouth recommendation. The major breweries cannot manufacture that. They gave it up decades ago when they centralized everything. Hawkstone now ships to Spain, Portugal, France, Australia, Canada, and parts of Asia. The brewing industry said this made no sense. You do not export British lager into countries with deep, established beer cultures. But Clarkson targeted precise audiences: British expats wanting a connection to home, tourists who drank Hawkstone while visiting Britain, international viewers of Clarkson's farm who want to try the beer they watched being made. A pack of Hawkstone in Spain carries a price equivalent to £8, double what it costs in Tesco, and it is moving because it is not competing with local beer. It is competing with a romanticized version of Britain. The export arm currently accounts for around 5% of total revenue and is growing at 40% year-on-year, near pure margin, because international pricing absorbs all shipping and logistics costs with substantial profit remaining. The international angle reveals something important about how Clarkson thinks about brand building that most domestic businesses never consider. He is not selling beer in Spain. He is selling belonging to British expats who want to feel connected to something from home. He is selling a cultural artifact to tourists who associate that specific taste with a holiday they loved. He is selling a piece of television to viewers in Australia who watched the show and wanted to complete the experience somehow. These are completely different emotional purchases, all fulfilled by the same brown bottle. That kind of multi-layered demand, each segment with its own motivation and its own willingness to pay a premium, is extraordinarily difficult to build and almost impossible to replicate quickly. Then there is the education initiative that recently launched. Hawkstone is running brewery tours and farm visits for schools and colleges across the country. Thousands of teenagers each year learning that beer originates from barley grown in British fields. Those kids are 3 to 5 years from legal drinking age. When they turn 18, which brewery will they recall? The one they visited on a school trip, where they watched the whole process unfold, or Carling, which they have only ever encountered in television adverts during football. This is long-term brand building, at a scale and with a sophistication that the major breweries simply do not think in. Their planning cycles run to quarterly targets and annual budgets. Clarkson is making investments that will not yield a return for half a decade. That is not how a television presenter stumbling into farming operates. That is how someone thinks when they have built a business with genuine long-term conviction and are not under pressure from shareholders demanding returns by the next earnings call. The structural freedom of private ownership is doing real work here, and the publicly listed breweries genuinely cannot match it. Here is what industry insiders are now saying privately. Hawkstone has demonstrated something the large breweries believed was not possible. That a genuinely successful drinks brand can be built in the modern era without conventional advertising, without global ingredient procurement, without industrial-scale production. Every accepted principle about what makes a brewery commercially viable, Clarkson has discarded and succeeded anyway. Business schools will be building case studies around this within 5 years. The wider implications are significant. If Hawkstone can thrive with local sourcing, transparent production, and premium pricing, why cannot other breweries do the same? The honest answer is that they can, but it demands dismantling and rebuilding their entire operating structure. The major players have committed billions to centralized infrastructure. They have anchored themselves to commodity supply chains. They have built their entire cost model around scale. Switching would not be a strategic pivot. It would be starting again from scratch, while somehow keeping the existing operation running. That is an almost impossible ask for a publicly listed company with obligations to shareholders and analysts watching every quarterly number. So it is simpler to hope Hawkstone is an exception, a one-off combination of celebrity, timing, and television exposure that cannot be reproduced. The problem is, it is already being reproduced. Smaller craft operations that watched Clarkson prove the concept are constructing local supply arrangements and transparent production lines right now. They do not have a television show, but they have the blueprint. And in a world where anyone can build an audience on YouTube or TikTok, the absence of a traditional media platform matters less every year. The shift has begun, and it began the moment Hawkstone proved the numbers could work. Clarkson's conversations with investors around the brewery expansion had one underlying objective: creating a replicable template. Any farm with barley capacity, the same framework, a local brewery. The model travels. That is the structural threat. Hawkstone becomes the proof of concept that starts pulling apart 5 decades of industry consolidation. The big breweries cannot acquire it. They cannot copy it. They cannot contain it. And they cannot afford to ignore it much longer, because every year they spend hoping it will plateau is another year the template gets refined and the imitators get more capable. What began as surplus barley sitting in a barn, or so the story goes, is now the single most disruptive development in British brewing in 50 years. The £75 million valuation is not a reflection of current revenues. It is a reflection of what the model could become if the regional expansion works, if the franchise approach holds, if other farmers across Britain begin replicating the same structure. Hawkstone becomes the blueprint for a fundamentally different kind of drinks business, one where the story is the product, the farm is the factory floor, and the television audience is the distribution network. The £75 million is not the destination, it is the opening shot, and the large breweries are only now beginning to grasp what that actually means.